Essa música.
Hello, I am Aisha,
and Paula, your cultural hybrid mental health therapist,
here to explore unfiltered and heartfelt conversations on core issues
that affect us as human beings. Get ready for honest, captivating,
and real stories that take you on a journey to navigate your life
in the best possible way.
So grab a seat
And stay with us on this episode of
Do We Have Your Attention?
Welcome to yet another episode of the Do We Have Your Attention podcast. We are your hosts, Paula B. Martins and
Aisha Popoola. And we're excited to get into a topic that we can all relate to in one way or the other. Drum roll!
I was about to hit the table. Oh no.
I was like, let me just impromptu with my mouth. Okay. The topic is called communication differences between generations. Yeah.
This is going to be an interesting topic, and I'm a little nervous. But okay, before we get started and before I move to feelings check-in, we need to also just specify.
Yes.
Wait, I just realized we might be different generations.
No, we're the same generations. You guys try to put me as Gen Z so bad, but I'm still a millennial.
Okay, so we identify as millennials.
Yes.
We don't need to discuss what year exactly we were born unless you feel like you need to share that.
No,
but
really.
we would be on the cusp of millennials and Gen Z.
Gen Z,
basically
yes.
that year. So when we're talking about our experiences or our experiences with generations before us, we're talking Gen Xers, we're talking baby boomers. And then when we're talking about generations after us, we're talking who, Aisha?
We're talking Gen Zs. I'm honorary Gen Z.
Period.
So I like to be both a millennial and a Gen Z. So I'm somewhere in the middle.
Okay. All right, before we get started, it's time for our feelings check-in. How are you feeling, Aisha?
Right now, I'm trying to feel yellow, like happy, positive energy, because there was just a lot of technical issues before this.
Yes.
And that was already kind of making me nervous. But the topic in general makes me nervous-ish. So I'm also feeling very like... What's the color?
Like gray.
See.
Maybe anxious.
Yeah, maybe anxious, like gray, yeah. But overall, I'm feeling very yellow, very confident to speak from my own experience.
Yeah.
What about you? How
I
are you
agree.
feeling?
I think that it would definitely help if a lot of what we're speaking about today in regards to communication differences between generations is from a personal place, still objective, less biased, but at least by sharing our own personal experiences, it might help make this a good conversation. So I think
agree.
I'm also feeling yellow and gray.
Okay.
Happy, excited, because obviously this is a very interesting conversation. And this is a conversation that I feel as though people can relate to. And then I'm also a little nervous and anxious to see how the conversation goes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I'm kind of glad that we're feeling the same way. So I feel some level of relief knowing that I'm not the only one feeling that way. So thank you for sharing. All right, so let's get into it. So, Paula.
Yes.
Why do you think, or what makes communication differences so common between generations? And do you think that this is something that has always existed?
Okay, so I also realized before I answer that question, that's a really heavy question.
It is.
Should we break down the actual generations and the timelines? Now, everybody has their own. Some people say 1995 is Gen Z. Some people say 1995 is millennial. So we're just going off of what Google is saying. Because it really doesn't matter.
You can go by Google.
All right, so baby boomers are those born after World War II. I was about to say, damn. Then I realized that that's very ageist.
That is very ageist. That is very ageist.
This generation experienced higher birth rates and younger marriages.
Yeah.
Generation X follows that, born between 1965 and 1980. This generation is the children of the silent generation and early baby boomers. The name comes from the 1991 novel Generation X by Douglas Coupland. Interesting information.
That's interesting fact, yeah.
And then who follows that, Aisha?
We have Generation Alpha, Gen A. Do we call them Gen A or Gen Alpha? I don't even know. Well, this generation is the children of Generation Y.
Wait, who's Generation Y?
I guess they're like after X, so XY.
So Generation Y is also called millennials. I see.
Oh.
So Generation Y/millennials follows Generation X, and that's between 1981 and 1996. You're millennial. Oh. We are millennials.
We are millennials. So we're Gen Y, kind of?
Yes, we are Generation Y, apparently. And we are the first generation to experience childhood with and without the internet. Yep, that's very true.
Yep, that sounds very accurate.
Very true. And then obviously who follows after that is
Gen Z. And this generation
Z.
Yes.
That's born between 1995 and 2009.
So I think there's like different age ranges.
Yes. I think
depending
people really
on where
struggle.
you search. Yeah.
I think 1995, 1996, a lot of people put them as millennials or Gen Zs. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
But yes, okay, we needed to break that down so everyone knows who we're referring to and what age range we're referring to. Most of our parents were most likely Gen Xers. Some of us have baby boomer parents.
And grandparents.
Some of us
if
have
you have grandparents
baby boomer parents. One baby boomer parent, one Gen Xer parent.
Oh, God.
Which makes one
interesting gap. Yeah. That's a very interesting gap.
What makes communication differences very common between generations? I think what we're already saying without saying is the timeline.
Yep.
Like it's how much has happened in these generations and how much they've experienced and how much they aren't necessarily going to experience firsthand as well. Because if we're looking at people who fall under baby boomers born after World War II, where were we?
Nowhere to be found.
None of us were existent.
Nowhere
so already,
to be found. Yeah.
It sort of shows what makes the difference. And when I think differences, I don't see it as negative.
No.
I just see it as something that's yet to be fully understood.
Yeah.
And something that maybe if understood, we can actually see that there is value in these differences.
Yeah.
I would say it's the
timelines.
It's a timeline, but if I'm also going to be honest with you, I think to a large degree as well, and we may be guilty for doing that, more so Gen Zs and millennials, where we see our own world experiences because it's the current world experience as truth, as fact.
Yeah.
And I think they also do that, to be fair. The generations before us, I think they also do that now thinking about it.
Yeah. I definitely agree with what you say. I think for each generation, we've all had different experiences. You know, like if we talk about like World War II, like such a traumatic historic event.
Yeah.
But we also talk about traumatic events like COVID-19 that we all experienced. And like children around this Gen Z. What's the next generation called? I don't even know.
I think, give me 1 second. I believe it's Alpha.
Like the COVID babies.
That's who
Gen
you were
Alpha. That's what I was saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like we're all born in these different timelines, different experiences that shape us in how like we're supposed to interact and communicate and just make sense of the world based off what's happening to us or what's been exposed to us. And I think as a result, there's always that gap in how we communicate because we've all lived different lives, different experiences. So there's no way if I went through World War II and someone that didn't experience the same, let's say there was just like a minor situation that was happening, I could see why people would be like, well, you don't even know what we went through, or like, this is very small compared to like what we went through. And and it's, sometimes I reflect and I'm like, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. You're right. No arguments over there. But I could also see where it's easy for us to clash because, like you were saying, it's so easy to stick to your perspective based off the generation and timeline that you're born in. Yeah. It's just like, the things happen, history, and we move on. People don't really reflect to understand how those historic moments do shape us and shape our mental health, emotional health, even social interactions. Yeah.
And you know, something interesting that I would share as we were going through the process of researching the conversation that we wanted to have and the questions.
Yeah.
Something I saw, and I would be honest with you, I was just like, oh, this is annoying. Why does this keep coming up on Google? But when I would research about obviously communication differences, now a few things that obviously did come up One was obviously cultural shift.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is very, very understandable.
Very big,
and it's very big, just in the sense where our values evolve over time.
Yeah.
The way in which we express ourselves evolve over time as well.
Yeah.
But then two other things that I saw were conflict. Obviously, our attitudes towards conflict is very, very different.
Agreed.
The way in which we approach difficult situations. And I think that's probably one of the biggest roots of a lot of challenges with communication differences between generations. But the other one that I saw that was so common was workplace.
Interesting.
Yeah, workplace expectations. Yeah. And I found it very interesting. And I think initially I didn't bring a curious approach to it. It was just more of, great, now I'm going to be triggered by all the baby boomer bosses I had or Gen Xer bosses that I had. And I don't want to have to speak about them. But I'm wondering, and I think we both can agree that obviously this has always existed. This is not something that is new, because even before boomers, there were generations before as well. Yeah. Now, obviously, they aren't here to be able to actually talk about their experiences. So we're only talking more about the living generations. Yeah. But I'm wondering for you, have you felt misunderstood by generations before you or even generations after you as well? Because I feel as though we're at a point where we do interact a lot with Gen Zs and Alphas that we can speak from those experiences. And if you're obviously comfortable sharing, what are some of those experiences?
Good question. I think that I felt misunderstood by both generations, if I'm being honest. If I take a moment just to reflect, when I think about the older generations, I think if we center around things related to like our mental health or just like emotional health, I found that there is this common theme of them being like, oh, you're too sensitive, or like you're overthinking. Like, it almost seems like they are very solution oriented, which I don't think is a bad thing, honestly. I don't think finding solutions to situations that are presented are like bad things. But I think that what that takes away from you is that you start to kind of minimize your feelings, and you start to feel like your concerns or your feelings are invalidated. And I think if you grow up in that kind of environment, you start to learn the message about like your feelings don't matter, or people don't care about how you feel, or that you start becoming like hyper independent in the sense of like you always have to find a solution, which obviously is not always productive in every situation. Like, yes, there's situations where you kind of have to like, okay, what's the solution? What can I do? But I think if that's your norm, there's consequences to like every decision that we make, basically. Yeah. And I think on the flip side, I've also felt misunderstood by the younger generation, because sometimes I think the issue with my Gen Zs, who I love, and I'm part of the Gen Z, I'm saying I'm honorary Gen Z, is that I think they like immediate gratification. It's very fascinating to see. Even just sitting there in sessions, having conversations with them is kind of like, well, what can I do to get this out of the way? Because I got things to do. And I'm like, girl, you just went through a history of a traumatic childhood. This is not something that is going to go in 2 days or 2 sessions. Like, you're going to have to work through it. And I think that their generation, they're very active and they're very curious. And I think that a lot of times they're very driven in a sense. And I think that's what makes them want that instant gratification. But I don't think that they realize like you do need to work hard, and things take time and things take process. That's one of the things I definitely appreciate about the older generation is they would kind of encourage you to keep going. Like, they're very, I just think about conversations that I have with like my parents or my friends' parents, or just like older coworkers or like older friends. And there's just always this common theme of them just being sure that the goal will be achieved. You just have to keep going. Versus the younger generation, I think they are more like, well, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I followed all the steps they said I should do, and I still did not see the result.
You know something funny about just listening to you right now? Yeah. I might be biased. And I know I literally said at the beginning, we're going to be less biased. But I feel as though just even listening to you, you pretty much explained why a lot of people feel as though millennials are the best generation, even though there is even though there is no best generation. Or let me put it this way, maybe more so the most grounded, the most stable, the most the ones with the healthiest mindset, the ones who are a lot more flexible and whatnot, because like we said earlier on, that they are the ones that were born, I guess, without technology and with
technology. Yeah.
And in listening to you about the rigidity of older generations, like the Xers and the baby boomers, and then I guess I don't even know what to call it.
I don't know the right word to use. Impulsivity may be right.
The impulsivity and the need for immediate gratification and solutions. And you find the millennials, typically we sort of fall under recognizing that they have to be solutions.
Yeah.
But also recognizing that things take time.
Yeah.
And it's okay to sort of go with the flow. So it's just funny because I was thinking about something I had watched earlier, and the woman was sharing her experience with, I believe, was a baby boomer and an Xer boss. And she said that one of the things that she was excited about experiencing going into the company was the possibility of being able to innovate, share ideas and whatnot. Yeah. And her boss, and I'm pretty sure this is very familiar. A lot of people will be like, yep,
I can relate.
They told me this when I was applying or when I started. And she said, her boss said, you were not paid to think. You were paid to do your job.
You are joking.
So I've heard that a lot. Like that is something that is very, very common, especially with Xers and obviously boomers as well. And I think it just really highlighted exactly, I guess, the way in which we process our worlds and that difference in processing and communication, because to some degree, creativity and innovation, one, is not seen as valuable per se.
Not really valued.
But it's also being seen rather as something that's like a privilege. Like you do your job first, and if there's time, you get the privilege of being innovative and creative. Versus obviously the opposite, where for us it's like, creativity and innovation helps us do
our jobs better. Right. We have to find a balance in between. But as we're even talking about it makes sense as to why these generations, like, there's that clash in communication. Because imagine one person is very rigid, one person is way too flexible, and then one person in the middle is like, I can understand both parts. It makes sense as to why I like that you brought the workplace, because it's so easy. I'm thinking about my own workplace now, and I'm just I'm seeing all the dynamics, and it's making so much sense as to how that translates, because we all are from different generations.
I have a question for you actually, because I know we're talking about feeling misunderstood and your own experiences.
Yeah.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Oh, God.
I know you didn't
Let this be a good question.
personal experiences where you did feel misunderstood, just common experiences that you have.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, with any personal experiences that are coming up for you, how do you actually handle it? Because this is something that a lot of people come to therapy for, with me. And as a family therapist, it can be because it's always typically with family.
Yeah,
the generational conflicts is typically with family or in the workplace.
Yeah.
And sometimes even, I don't know how to navigate experiences like that, where you're trying to teach your client to really hone in on their boundaries,
right,
and hone in on their values, but also have empathy for the generations before them. And you're like, this is difficult. So I'm wondering for you, how have you handled feeling misunderstood by even the generations before or even the ones afterwards?
I'm not gonna lie, this is something that I'm still working on, if I'm just being 100% honest. It's never, I don't think it's something that's very easy for you to fully navigate. Like, even if you know the logical and most, I guess, productive approach to take. I think that what I've been trying so far, if I'm being honest, is being more understanding and patient. And kind of leading with curiosity rather than defensiveness. I, however, find that it's easier for me to be defensive when I know the people I'm like, it's like friends and family versus clients or like co-workers, if that makes sense. Like with my parents, I feel like I'm very defensive. My uncles, my aunties, family friends, like when they say something, I just want to fight. I want to go into defense mode. However, I have found that that's not always productive, because they also go into defense mode, and it just becomes like a block, two walls blocking each other. And the younger generation, I'll give specific examples in a moment. I'm just thinking more widely now. I think when I've been defensive with them, I think their lack of, I'm just giving from my own experience, the lack of seriousness to what I'm saying, or them even not really even taking my defensiveness seriously, has even made me more annoyed. So I've just been like, well, these ones are not serious. Like,
And often emotional.
And often very emotional. So I think just being very, with at least older generation, for example, my parents, I've been very good with explaining why. Like there's a situation with my parents where they didn't understand why I needed space because they ran into solution and they wanted to support me. I knew in that moment that the intention was pure and they were just trying to be good parents. But I didn't need that necessarily from them, the solution. I just needed them to listen and for them to like appreciate the fact that I even brought this problem to them in the first place. 1, 2, respect the boundary of me saying, I will call you back. I just need space right now. So I've been trying and practicing to explain to them, like, I'm telling you, I need this because if you don't allow me to have this space, I'll be very emotional. I may not communicate effectively when I'm trying to communicate and doing all of that stuff. And with my clients, I love that the Gen Zs are very curious and they're very open. And honestly, they'll ask you all the questions in the world. Sometimes I'm like, dang, why did your brain go there? But I think being open and being honest and shutting down assumptions and helping them kind of understand that your perspective doesn't have to be the one that's just right. Because I think a lot of time, the defensiveness is just like, why are you not seeing it my way? Because I know that I'm right. Because I've gone through this, I've experienced this, blah, blah, blah. But trying to help them understand, like, we can both see each other's perspectives and respect it and come to like a mutual understanding. Because guess what? We still have lived experiences that are different. We still have gone through things differently. So we may not necessarily 100% agree with it, but we can still respect it and understand it.
Absolutely.
What about you?
You really, really hit the nail on the head with that. And it's a tough thing, what you're also describing. And we obviously want to empathize with anybody who is navigating these differences on both ends. We're not discriminating here.
No discrimination.
It's a tough thing. And
it's
honestly,
really hard.
Last year was probably one of my best years. Best years yet, in the sense where
I love it.
It was from a growth perspective. It was from a perspective of, I can do hard things. I've known that I could do hard things from an external point of view, battling illness, whatnot, dealing with trauma. But when it came to setting boundaries and really recognizing my value and my worth, but also putting my foot down with forms of communication or differences or whatever you want to call it that weren't really helpful for me and my own trajectory or for my mindset, I will give myself an A for effort.
No, I agree. You did a good job.
I went from setting boundaries in my relationships, and I guess my romantic relationships, to then saying, okay, who's next? Who's next? Okay.
I love it.
All right.
You're like,
family.
Okay, there's a list.
Yeah, next. And my therapist and myself, we were literally just recapping this week of just the growth. Because I can actually say that I am in a place, and I'm not where I would like, but I can recognize that I am in a place where I can say that I'm able to now have empathy while also still stating my grounds, my opposing views and beliefs with the, obviously, family members that are generations before me. And even the ones afterwards, but I'll say mainly the ones before me. And even sometimes the older millennials and younger millennials, we clash as well.
Oh, yeah, we definitely do.
I can actually say that I am at a point where I recognize that, one, there's no right or wrong, but I don't need anybody else's assumption or stereotype around what they think is the right way or the wrong way. It doesn't have to influence me. I can acknowledge it, but distance myself from it, basically. And in listening to you, one of the things that kept coming up for me is the barriers in relation, obviously barriers to resolving, like what are some of the barriers that make it difficult for us to resolve generational conflict. And I don't know if you realize that you were describing it, but you were basically describing stereotyping and assumptions, where sometimes we even as well make assumptions of the older generation. So we're already defensive. They also might make assumptions that we don't know anything. So they are already defensive or reactive or whatever the case might be. And to some degree, it doesn't really allow us create space to really listen and hear each other out with respect and understanding that we don't have to agree, but we can respect and value this person's experience. So I'm wondering, what are other barriers, I guess you would say, that exist as well?
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about just some of the things that's caused a lot of clash between me and just people in my life that are just older, let's say parents, family members. And I think a bigger one may be like traditional views or like cultural views that I don't know why. Okay, we're not trying to be biased and we're not trying to judge, but I think sometimes, or let me just speak for myself, I struggle with understanding why there's just some traditions or some cultural views that they stick to and they think like you just have to do it this way, because there are some things that I would agree with and I'm like, okay, I can see why that's in place, or I can see why we use this view traditionally or culturally, but sometimes I'm like, it may not be 100% necessary. And I think that causes a lot of resistance if your parents are saying, based off this cultural, religious, traditional view, like this is an important value for us. And then you're like, I know it's important, but like when I think about my own values, it may not be number one. It's probably like number 5. And that causes a clash because it's hard to compromise 1 to 5. That's quite a distance, And I think they use usually the approach of like, you have to see it our way because this has worked for us. So that thing about like, we know what's right, always being right. And then we're like, actually, it may have been right for you, but considering how the world is going, it may not be necessarily right. So I think the biggest one I would say is like people just trying to be right. And in thinking about their own life experiences or just the values that they hold and trying to, rather than compromising and coming to like a middle ground of, you know what? Yes, in our own days, probably that worked for us, but we could see how things change. Rather than going that approach, being like, nope, I'm telling you, you have to go this route. It's worked 50 million times and we don't see how that's going to change now because the world is changing. So I think sometimes that causes a lot of resistance and backlash. But I also think that when we think about the way that they were raised, for example, my parents would tell me, for example, my dad would tell me, because I think my mom had a different relationship with her own dad, but he would tell me like his parents, there was like no expression of emotions. It's kind of like you just had expectation to go to school. Like they never had a full-grown face-to-face conversation talking about your life. And daddy, I'm sorry I'm putting your business out there. I'm so sorry. But I think hearing that makes me so sad because it's like, what do you mean you didn't talk to your parents? And I think he also even took him time to realize that there's value in knowing your kids. There's value in having conversations with your kids. There's value in that face-to-face expressing your emotions, because imagine just growing up not having that. Like, it just seems very lonely.
It's unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate. But like, even think about that. Like, how can you even learn how to communicate? How can you learn how to resolve conflict?
That part.
How can you learn how to just have a mutual disagreement if you didn't grow up having that model? You know what I mean?
No, you're hitting the nail on the head. And even where you bring up this notion of trying to understand how does culture equate to right. This is the way you need to do it and whatnot. And I'll share with you. Now, I'm going to, whoever the listeners are listening, I'm going to burst your brains today.
Oh God, I can't wait.
This is a topic of conversation that I have debates with my mom about. But I would obviously say as well that I am very, very grateful that at least I have one parent who is really, really trying to bridge that gap. Even though she doesn't realize that she's doing, I think she realizes it, to be honest. I think now she does. Initially, she didn't. For her, the thing she values the most in life is being able to be a mom to her children, like her relationship with her kids. So if it means I have to understand certain things that I did not have to be, like I didn't necessarily have to learn or whatnot, I need to be uncomfortable, fine. Does she push back? Yeah. Do we have arguments? Yes. So we were having a conversation about this notion of culture, right or wrong, and we were obviously just sharing about someone who we know who's very much so about culture, but seeing it as it has to be this way, and then there's gender roles, and then there's expectations, and there's responsibilities. And I told my mom, and I didn't even know when I lost my shit, and I said, but let's be real. Let me be, I guess, an active listener and listen to understand and not just react. And I said, let's even say culture. Okay, I've never seen anywhere where it says that culture is to harm you. Tradition is to harm you, right? So if we're looking at definition of culture, we say, okay, it's a system of learned and shared beliefs,
values,
languages, norms, values, like you said, that a shared group of people identify with. And it helps provide you a framework within which you are, it doesn't even say like you are expected to live in, but in which you live in and you work with. Now it's a framework. Typically, when we think about things like framework, we're not saying this is the rule. You have to do A, B, C. It's almost like, okay, it's giving you knowledge that you're going to now apply and then make it make sense for your own life trajectory. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you actually navigate culture and tradition. So, and I was explaining to her and I said, culture is not to harm. It's not. The people who weaponize and exploit culture and tradition as a way to obviously gain whatever it is that they gain from it. That then creates this notion that let's be real. And then creates this notion that it is something that's harmful. Now, it's not the culture that is harmful, it's the person that is harmful. And unfortunately, because that messaging gets lost, we then also start to see, and unfortunately, we can also say that a lot of their generations, their way of having agency, because they weren't really given agency, is control and power. So when you think about it from that perspective, you're like, okay, it makes so much sense why whenever we're having conversations or differences in communication, it's difficult for us to hear you because, one, we're also a generation who does have agency, does have some level of autonomy over our life trajectory. So we're just seeing it for what it is. We're not trying to exploit it per se. Even though obviously there's two people. I know some.
Not the shade.
There's still people in our generation that are exploiting culture and tradition. So it's just interesting because when you obviously have conversations like this, I remember my mom kind of just going, oh, wow, like that is true. It's not to harm you. And if you think about it as I am supposed to do certain things because it's expected of me culturally, but I feel as though I am being harmed or my agency and autonomy is taken away from you, then that's not culture anymore. That's just wherever it is that you want to identify with. So you make an excellent point when you bring up cultural differences and honestly resistance to change. And evolving and growth being something that can easily cause barriers.
I'm so glad you actually brought that up because, it makes a lot of sense. If I don't feel like I have control of my life, then, I'm going to rebel against it and just find, I guess, other outlets to express what actually feels natural to me and what feels real to me. And I guess that's when they say, oh, this child is being rebellious, or we might take you to mountain of fire to pray and say that there's something going on with you. When the reality is, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But they may say, oh, this child has disgraced us and done all these horrible things. When the reality is, there's just a gap in communication and understanding. And you know, when you're only viewing things from one lens, then you're unable to kind of give your child or whoever that person is their own agency and autonomy to make decisions for their life because you're always telling them what to do. And that's just not a life to live. So I guess just to kind of switch gears, because you kind of already brought this up earlier in conversation, I'm wondering how you think the conversation about mental health has shifted among generations. And do you feel like, because there's a lot of conversations where people are starting to say like the younger generation, they are more privileged with the access they have to mental health services and resources. Like, do you think that that's true in a sense?
Honestly, I actually do. And I guess this is where I can understand. And I think it's easier for us as therapists because we have experience where we've worked with different generations of clients. And I do think mental health resources are a privilege in general, period. But I think that the conversations around mental health actually, to some degree, there's a level of privilege that we do have as generations from millennials down. Because we didn't experience a large amount of our lifetime dealing with the heaviness of the stigmatization of mental health in the way in which for boomers or Gen Xers, for them, they grew up, they were born into that. I don't even want to imagine the level of stigmatization. I remember my mentor telling me, I have to even just quickly Google this as well. He was sharing with me because obviously he also is very open about his ADHD diagnosis. And I think for me, who also got diagnosed later in life or whatever you want to call it, he was sharing with me because he's in his 70s. And he said that what they used to call ADHD before
back then
was something brain disorder.
Oh my God.
Like something along those lines. And I wish I could, if I figure it out, I would make sure to just note that down in our conversation today. But it used to be called something along the line brain disorder. So already even just hearing him say that, I was like, what? But obviously, this is someone in their 70s, so he understands what he went through as someone with an ADHD diagnosis. So absolutely, I think that it's a privilege, just point blank. And then in addition to it being a privilege as well, I would say that the conversation is changing.
It is.
Is largely changing in a good way because there is increased access to resources. There is a lot more improved technology that also helps people. Let's say like my mom share our podcast with her friends and people actually say, no, I decided to take my dad to therapy and my dad is talking to someone. So to some degree, there is improvement there. And I think the discord that typically happens as well is obviously the openness.
Yes.
We millennials, Gen Zs are, I think they take it when it comes to openness. Like you can see a TikTok video basically with somebody saying, this is what ADHD looks like. Like it's amazing very how open. They normalize this to the point where I understand like you also have to still have boundaries and control.
Agreed.
Because there's misinformation. But it's so funny how much it's normalized that easily people's reaction to it is, you're victimizing yourself. Because it seems so rare, but I think we can all sort of learn from the way in which for millennials, we obviously played a very significant role.
Just give ourselves a quick shout out.
Shout out millennials.
Shout out to millennials. Y'all
we played a significant role in normalizing the conversation, and then the Gen Zs were like, we'll take it from here type of situation.
They took it all the way there. Shout out to the Gen Zs too.
No, I would definitely say that. I think if I were looking 5-6 years from today, the conversation has shifted.
1000%.
For me to be able to have conversations with my mom, I could never be able to have that conversation with her years ago. So I think to a large degree it has. And I would like to also look at it from a positive perspective.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. And I do think that there's a lot more openness. Like even the word you used was like normalization of it is making everyone kind of gravitate towards like being curious about it and may not necessarily take 100% steps to go into all the resources available. But I think that people are learning to be open to it and like learning from it. And I guess just to wrap up, let's talk a little bit about how we could bridge the gap of communication between generations. What can we do to bridge this gap? How can we all be one big happy family?
You say that so
hypothetically. Hypothetically.
Well, I don't think it's far-fetched. I think that you make a great point. And obviously, when you think about family, you also think about cohesiveness, coming together, mutual respect, healthy boundaries. I think I'm just going to quote someone that I was listening to earlier on because so her name is, and I hope I don't butcher it, her name is Vayona Terleth. So Terleth. And she was sort of just talking about these experiences with baby boomer CEOs and Gen X managers and obviously having millennials and Gen Zs and basically interactions with a lot of people. And she was talking about bridging the gap too as well. One thing that she said that really stood out for me was you are 100% responsible for 50% of the relationship the conversation, whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
Meaning that the role that we play is actually a lot more significant. And sometimes we wait for generations to be less defensive. Then we are not defensive.
Yeah.
We wait for them to sort of put their armor down. Then we put our armor down because everyone is sort of trying to protect the reality of what their own experience in this life is.
Yeah.
And she was just explaining that when we start listening free of judgment, and then we also bring curiosity, but we also bring respect, we start recognizing that it is important for us to be able to understand the person first before we seek to be understood. And I think a lot of times we want to be understood before we understand. But that's the whole point. The whole point is if you're looking at 100% of the responsibility that you play in the 50% of the conversation, and the person obviously is accountable to themselves, it's very important that we change our perception of these conversations. We change our perception of how we have these conversations as well, because, and something she said was, perceptions change feelings and it eventually changes behavior.
100%.
And I was just like, okay, Viola,
wow.
Thank you.
She ate with that one. That was a good one. I definitely agree that it's very natural for us to automatically go into the state of wanting to be understood. But sometimes that's also a defense. And again, it limits us from understanding. There's no being understood if the other person or the other situation is not being understood too. So there has to be some level of empathy, openness, I think curiosity as well, because that gives the space of vulnerability and easy communication. And I think that's one of the most effective ways to bridge gaps between communicating. And I think that sometimes we're too focused on our differences, and a lot of times it's like we just communicate differently. We just do things differently. But sometimes how about we just celebrate those differences and how they make us our unique individuals, but also being open to finding a common ground. Like nobody's saying you have to change your ways 100%, right? Because the things that you've probably done or the things that you've learned have worked for you, but also it's like, but there might be room to learn something new. So yes, there's differences, but there's openness to like curiosity and learning new things.
Absolutely. And you make an excellent point. And honestly, if I'm being real with you, I think as human beings, sometimes we desire to be seen and heard and valued and validated so strongly that it makes it difficult for us to be able to see something that's different from us and our experience without it invalidating our own experiences. So it's a good thing to be able to start changing that perception around difference. Does not mean right or wrong. Does not mean healthy or unhealthy, even though, so of course, in some cases it could be. But really looking at differences as a way for you to be able to learn about the other person a lot more.
Wow. What a powerful episode. I kind of wish we didn't have to end. I'm hoping, Paula, wink, wink, that
there'll be a part 2.
We have, a part 2, but this time we bring other people from other generations just to hear their personal perspective. I know,
We're speaking it into the universe.
Speaking it into the universe, yes. Okay, well, what is one last thing you would like to say just to end the episode that you like people to take away, just to wrap up?
Change your perception around communication differences between generations. And by changing your perception, it changes your feelings about it, and it changes your approach to these conversations.
I love that. And with that being said, thank you for listening. Yay!
How can our listeners find us, then find you, and then find me?
Hey, good.
So our listeners, we'll start with us. So the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at DWHYA podcast.
Yes.
On Twitter /X at DWHYA podcast. And then on TikTok at DWHYA podcast 1.
Yes.
And then if you want to email us, info@dwhyapodcast.com.
Yeah, thank you.
How can our listeners find you, Miss Aisha Popoola?
You can find me on Instagram at ab.popoola and at LinkedIn at Aisha Popoola. Where can they find you?
At paula.b.martins on Instagram / TikTok. And then I think if you type that on LinkedIn, you can actually find the name will pop up.
Okay. Well, thank you all for listening. And
Thanks
we'll
for being
see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.